Hi everybody, I'm Ryan. Today we're going to continue our constructed set review of Phyrexia All Will Be One with the black cards. Now when I do my constructed set reviews, I don't rate them. I think Magic is more complex than like a 1 through 10 or 1 through 5 rating. But what I am going to do is talk about the cards that I think are going to make a splash in a constructed format, skip over the cards that I don't think are going to be played in constructed at all, and talk about the context that I think they are going to be played. Let's do it! Phyrexia Betrayal's Sting is 4 generic, 1 black, 1 Phyrexian black, so 6 mana total or 5 mana and 2 life. Is a legendary planeswalker that starts at 6 loyalty, but it is completed, so if you pay the 2 life for it, it'll come in with 4 loyalty instead. Has 0 loyalty to draw a card, you lose 1 life, and proliferate, so really it's a +1, because you can proliferate the loyalty counters on it. -2, target creature becomes a treasure artifact with tap to sacrifice the artifact, add 1 mana of any color, and loses all other card types and abilities. And -9, if target player has fewer than 9 poison counters, they get a number of poison counters equal to the difference. So Phyrexia Betrayal Sting is really good. So it's a great control planeswalker, right? Or really like late game mid-range planeswalker, maybe a sideboard mid-range card. So the draw card lose a life is like has famously been very, very good. And then being able to proliferate and either proliferate poison counters or proliferate other walkers or proliferate +1/+1 counters or oil counters or whatever you want. All very, 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 very good. And its -2 is just a slightly worse destroy target creature. It maybe in some cases slightly better destroy target creature because it gets around indestructible. Because it doesn't destroy a creature and replaces it with a treasure. A creature becomes a treasure. So it's like really, really good. It can protect itself, is a removal spell, is card advantage, and its -9 doesn't directly say you win the game, but you were like this close to winning a game. If you can get Phyrexia to like 10 loyalty, for example, you -9 and then next turn proliferate and then you win. Or you -9 and then just cast that blue 2 mana spell that says draw a card, proliferate, and you win the game. So it gets you like an inch away from winning the game. And I think that's really, 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 really cool. I think Phyrexia Betrayal Sting, again, is going to exist at least in Standard, maybe in Pioneer, in like out of the sideboard and mid-range decks, and as a black control finisher. Phyrexian Obliterator is 4 black mana, is a 5/5 with trample. This is a reprint. And whenever a Sorts deal damage to Phyrexian Obliterator, that Sorcere's controller sacrifices that many permanents. Phyrexian Obliterator, when I saw the reprint, I was a lot more excited about it than I think I should have been. Phyrexian Obliterator, I think the primary like context Phyrexian Obliterator is going to exist in is to possibly be a mono-red killer, but mono-red already isn't very good in Standard, or really in Pioneer even right now. That's how it existed in previous iterations of Phyrexian Obliterator. It was just a mono-red, just Slayer. But the issue with Phyrexian Obliterator for just being black mid-range decks 4-drop is it's competing with Shieldred, and Shieldred is unbelievable. And I think Shieldred's a lot better than Phyrexian Obliterator in a lot of contexts. So Phyrexian Obliterator is probably going to be overshadowed by Shieldred, in my opinion. One position where Phyrexian Obliterator might actually be very good is in like black devotion decks, and in Pioneer a black devotion deck has been on the brink for a little while, and it's really possible Phyrexian Obliterator might push that deck over the top, and I'm pretty excited to see that. Drivnod Carnage Dominus is 3 generic and 2 black. As a Phyrexian Horror is an 8/3. If a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers additional time, and you can play 2 Phyrexian black to do what all the other gods do, which is exile 3 creature cards from your graveyard, put an indestructible counter on Drivnod Carnage Dominus. I mean, this is going to exist in like aristocrat style decks. It might push an aristocrat style deck over the top in Pioneer. It really, really could. I don't see a place for it yet in Standard unless I'm missing something. But if an aristocrat style deck where like, you sacrifice and cool things happen when you sacrifice, like style deck comes out, then this card will be great. If not, this card will be bad. But 5 mana 8/3 that you can make indestructible for like pretty cheap is pretty sweet in and of itself, so maybe it'll just be played like that. Karamonyx the Rat King is 2 black and 1 generic, is a Phyrexian rat 3/3, has Toxic 1, and other rats you control have Toxic 1. And when this card enters the battlefield, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal any number of rat cards from among them, and put the revealed cards into your hand, put the rest in the bottom of your library in a random order. I have not done the legwork to see if there's a rat deck in Standard or Pioneer. I really hope there is. Now, I think this is a gimmick. I totally think this is a gimmick card, or maybe even like a limited card, or like a cool commander card. But I did want to point out how neat this card is, and that if there aren't enough other rats, or if there are other rat lords or anything like that, like this could be very, very good. It being like a it being able to get rats out of your deck and refill your hand when you play it, and also doing the toxic stuff. I don't think other rats having toxic one will really matter unless there's a lot of other rats already with toxic, right? And the extra toxic is gravy. But being able to put any number of rat cards from the top 5 cards of your deck into your hand is very good if a rat deck ends up coming out. But I don't foresee that happening, but I wanted to point this out that there is a context where this card could be good. Black Sun's Twilight. I love the new Sun's abilities. Is black and X is an instant. Up to one target creature gets -X/-X till end of turn. Its X is 5 or more. Return a creature card with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So this is a pretty okay removal spell. I mean, it's less efficient than a lot of other removal spells, but I think the top end is very, very good, right? It's too bad it's from your graveyard, right? So you can't just like kill something, grab that thing. The top end is insane, right? It can't kill as efficiently in the early game, but like if you play this as a 1 or 2 of in these black mid-range decks, and then like, sometimes you'll just use it on turn 3 or 4 and just to kill an X2 or whatever. And then sometimes you're going to cast it on turn 10 and just win the game with it. And I think that's really, really powerful. Archfiend of the Dross is 2 and 2 black Phyrexian Demon 6/6 flyer. It enters the battlefield with 4 oil counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, you remove an oil counter. Then if there are no oil counters on it, you lose the game. And whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, its controller loses 2 life. So there's obviously a giant downside to this card, right? There's the idea that you can lose the game if it exists on the battlefield for 4 turns. But I just want to put it in like a context, right? This reminds me of like Desecration Demon a little bit, in that there's a huge downside to it that your opponent can take advantage of. But that's okay. Like a 6/6 flyer for 4 is insane. Again, similar to Phyrexian Obliterator, I think the issue is that this card is going to be competing with Shieldred quite a bit. But I have a 6/6 flyer. Often games are over by turn 8 anyway, especially if you're banging in with a 6/6. In addition, if things get really, really bad, you're already playing black, so you probably have removal for your own creature anyway, right? And this card is, especially against other creature decks where you're like removing stuff, you play Archfiend, remove more stuff or whatever, like this is probably going to close the game. Now again, competing with Phyrexian Obliterator and Shieldred, I think both of those cards are probably better than this card. It probably won't see play, unfortunately, unless you just like are a really, really big mana black midrange deck or something. But I did want to like kind of call out this card because I think there's like this card has the potential of being very good, but there are just other better cards that exist. And I missed Desecration Demon. Geth, Thane of Contracts is 2 black and 1 generic 3/4. Other creatures you control get -1/-1, so that's a giant downside. And plus it being legendary. However, you can pay 3 mana, 2 black and 1 generic, and tap it to return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains if this creature would leave the battlefield, exile it instead of putting it anywhere else, and activate only as a sorcery. We're getting a lot of reanimation like enablers, and this is a giant reanimation enabler. I think that's a very exciting thing. It's possible this will exist just as like, just overwhelm your opponent with crazy reanimation and things like that. And I'm really excited to see where like standard reanimation can go. This is probably too slow and too specific, and like being unable to get itself out of the graveyard probably isn't quite good enough. Already, it's probably not great for like Eternal formats, but it's possible this could be one of the enablers in a reanimation thing, especially like a reanimation deck to like, get really rolling with it, right? You have a bunch of targets, you reanimate this guy, and then this guy reanimates the big stuff every single turn. I think that's really exciting. Phyrexian Arena is a 3 mana enchantment, 2 black, 1 generic. At the beginning of your upkeep, you draw a card and lose a life. So this card is a reprint. This card's insane, right? It's exactly what black mid-range decks want in the mid-range mirrors or against control decks, right? You play this card and you draw 2 cards a turn, you lose a life every turn, but you don't really care about that in the matchups that you want this card in, right? You don't really care about that in the mid-range matchup. You don't really care about that against, different control decks. It's also a great devotion situation with... like if there's a devotion deck that pops up in Pioneer, which we've been flirting with a little bit, but this card is just going to be played in standard as a black mid-range like mirror breaker and control breaker. Like it's just such a good card. Like I remember in mono black devotion way back when Underworld Connections, which is a worse version of Phyrexian Arena because you have to give up what a land does. Or actually, I guess it could be a better version in some cases if you don't want to lose the life or whatever. But in any case, in most cases, worst version of Phyrexian Arena was played as a 4 of, right, in these matchups. So it's possible Phyrexian Arena is going to live in the same vein. I'm really excited to be playing Phyrexian Arena in Standard. Vron, Executioner Thane is a 2-mana 2/2 Phyrexian Vampire. Whenever one or more other creatures you control die, each opponent loses 2 life, you gain 2 life. This ability triggers only once each turn. This card is so close to being insane. So I talked earlier about like a possibility of an Aristocrats deck popping up. Like this is definitely one of the enablers. The issue with that though is this ability only triggers once each turn. Is a better Blood Artist. Besides it only being creatures you control, which normally you don't care about with Blood Artist, you know, in decks that play Blood Artist. But the ability only triggering once might not be that good. Though once each turn, which means if you have a sacrifice outlay, you can do it during your turn and then also during your opponent's turn. So a 8-mana life swing every turn cycle is pretty solid. So I think they're really afraid of printing another Blood Artist, plus this being like legendary. But we're getting closer and closer to an Aristocrats like self-sacrifice style standard deck. And I'm kind of excited about that. I really enjoy decks like that. Drown in Ichor is a 2-mana sorcery. Target creature gets -4/-4 till end of turn, and you proliferate. So there are better removal spells that exist, right? This being sorcery speed is kind of icky. -4/-4 instead of just kill something is kind of icky too. But being able to proliferate, right? If you exist in a proliferate deck, like having slightly worse cards that say proliferate on them, as long as you can like capitalize on that proliferate, is excellent. And this card is going to be played within those decks and within those contexts. Necrogen Communion is a 2-mana enchantment aura. You enchant a creature you control. It has Toxic 2, and when it dies, return that card to the battlefield under your control. I think this is really cool. I don't really know how I feel about this card, but I want to bring it up because it's possible it'll be played. I really can see this card just being played in a black Toxic deck if those black Toxic decks exist. You know, I think the good Toxic decks are going to be where you have a few creatures that have like really good abilities and really good Toxic value, and then just proliferate. And so if you like play this card, you get to keep those creatures around, right? And give it extra Toxic, so it's even scarier. And then they have to kill it, and then it comes back. But really, you're probably just like opening yourself up to 2-for-1ing yourself, you know, when you attempt to like enchant the creature, unless there's any like enter the battlefield Toxic abilities. I think is the reason you would play this card. But I did want to bring it up in case there's a possibility there's not like enough cards that are going to be popping up in these Toxic decks to make Toxic good enough. And if that's the case, I think this card is going to be played. Scheming Aspirant is a 2-mana 1/3. Whenever Phyrexian Advisor, whenever you proliferate, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. This could be played in these like proliferate mid-range control decks that I really think are going to pop up. These like proliferate matters, like maybe poison counter matters, you know, planeswalkers matter, oil counters matter, like control mid-range decks, like just playing this at 2 mana and then like all of your cards being better. I could see this being an enabler. Sheoldred's Edict is a 2-mana instant where you choose one, and there's 3 options. It's already insane, right? Each opponent sacrifices a non-token creature. Each opponent sacrifices a creature token. Each opponent sacrifices a planeswalker. This card's insane. This card's so good. It being instant speed, it being like, you know, competitively cost, and it has so many options. Like, give me cards with options at instant speed at low cost. I'll play them all the time. This is going to be played maybe even as a 4 of in like mid-range and black control decks. Like, this card's so insane. It's what you're looking for in a removal spell. Bilia Skulldweller is a 1-mana 1/1 with Death Touch and Toxic 1 Phyrexian Insect. I mean, we've played 1-mana 1/1s with Infect before. This is Death Touch with Toxic 1. I think having these low-cost Toxic 1 creatures, especially ones that are really annoying to block, you know, could exist in like these black Toxic decks. So I just wanted to bring this card up. Annihilating Glare is a 1-mana sorcery. As an additional cost, you can pay 4 mana or sacrifice an artifact or creature, destroy target creature or planeswalker. If an Aristocrats deck pops up, this is going to be one of its best removal spells, right? It's just like I guess a slightly better Blown Splinters because you have the option of paying the mana. And Bone Splinters has been played and constructed before. Blightbelly Rat is a 2-mana 2/2 with Toxic 1, and when it dies, proliferate. So like you can play this card, have some removal spells so it gets in once or twice, and then when it dies, like it adds another poison counter. I think that's really solid, right? It's this is similar saying that like this is a 2-mana 2/2 that when it dies it deals 2 damage, and we probably play those cards in our aggressive decks. And so if we have an aggressive Toxic deck, we probably play this card. Duress got reprinted. Your opponent 1-mana sorcery, your opponent reveals their hand, choose a non-creature, non-land card from it. The player discards that card. This 100% just be played in the sideboard of decks that you know, against like control decks and stuff. Like, moving on. Infectious Inquiry is a 3-mana sorcery, 1 black, 2 generic. You draw 2 cards and lose 2 life, and each opponent gets a poison counter. Divination has been played in Standard before. It's possible Power Creep has gotten too good at this point to play Divination, but if it hasn't, this can be just a better Divination in Poison decks, you know, or these Proliferate decks. Divination and your opponent takes 2 damage, essentially, is what it says, and we like that. It's possible that this like Divination card, like in a deck that you want, it would be an aggressive deck, but an aggressive deck doesn't want Proliferate stuff, so like Pestilent Siphoner is a 2-mana 1/1 flying and toxic 1. Is a competitively cost, has toxic, is evasive. It'll probably be played in black aggressive toxic decks. Vraska's Fall is a 2 generic 1 black instant. Each opponent sacrifices a creature, a planeswalker, and gets a poison counter. Again, in these Proliferate poison counter decks, it's really possible we're going to be playing very slightly worse cards, so we can also like incrementally deal that damage and incrementally get a poison counter. Like a red aggressive deck would probably play this card if it said instead of poison counter it dealt 2 damage. So an aggressive like black toxic deck will probably play this card like instead of other removal spells or sacrifice effects. So there you have what I think about the black cards in Phyrexia All Will Be One within a constructed context. Really the big takeaway for me here is it seems like black is so far the aggressive toxic like color. Like we're blue and green are probably like the Proliferate toxic color, like if you really want to win on poison counters slowly. Where weirdly enough black, which is the removal spell kind of slower strategy very often, is like there's a lot of cards that would lend themselves to be in an aggressive toxic deck. At least in Standard, so we'll see how that turns out. If you like this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Check me out on social medias. Links are above me and in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.